How do you make sure that people don't keep reinventing the wheel all the time for the same thing? So you need to curate knowledge and preserve it and make it findable in a way that is usable across the board. A lot of companies have designed their own knowledge management teams. They might name it different. Can call it content. Somebody can call it knowledge. But I think every industry at the end of the day now have this kind of a role. What I suggest is look at how much remuneration you're getting, but also look at the role and its future avenues. What can you do after 5 years, 10 years?
Hello and a warm welcome to a multi-part episode, episode 8, part 1 of our podcast series, Crafting Your Writing Career, Paths and Possibilities, brought to you by the Learner Me team. I am Mahua, your host, and we are thrilled to welcome Deepankar Majumdar, Senior Content Manager, as our guest today. With a global focus on insurance, Deepankar brings a wealth of experience from his role at Boston Consulting Group and his previous positions at BlackRock, Bain, and Gerson Lehman Group, where he excelled in knowledge management, finance, analytics, and stakeholder management. He is passionate about reading, storytelling, and exploring new business topics. Additionally, Deepankar enjoys designing and conducting training sessions on various management and project-specific subjects. Join us for an enlightening discussion with Deepankar Majumdar. Deepankar, thank you very much for your time. We are trying to bring up the awareness level of different career possibilities. With that context, can you tell us more about knowledge management?
Yeah, sure. The knowledge management could differ from industry to industry and company to company. Anybody does knowledge management basically for two reasons. First is they need to preserve their intellectual property. Whatever they make, they need to keep it in a form that is usable or reusable. And the second thing is that it might be a very huge organization and it could be very difficult to connect from one team to other very swiftly because they are in different locations and they don't have any connection bridge between them. How do you make sure that people don't keep reinventing the wheel all the time for the same thing? So you need to curate knowledge and preserve it and make it findable in a way that is usable across the board, right? While you are doing it, you need to do some value addition to it. So what happens is that data or presentations might come in their absolute raw form and you have to curate it in a way that is consumable by general audience within the firm. Now, I'm not saying general audience outside the firm because these knowledge things will not go outside the firm. Every industry these days ends up publishing something on their website, which are generally topic reports or their experiences. For example, if you go to any consulting firm website today, or even any tech website today, or even any finance website today, you will find that they have written a lot about Gen AI or artificial intelligence. Like, so those are articles that every firm ends up publishing for their marketing purposes. But internally, the IP that is generated within the firm is preserved by way of knowledge management. Right? So, which basically sometimes indulges in protecting the client's identity in a way that you get to know the message, what happened, and what the company did during the process, but without telling people who did you do it for. And then in some cases, there is some research that happens that a company does, and that is preserved in a way that it is useful for other people in the firm. And what happens is that you always need a single platform across the firm where this knowledge can be shared and consumed, which again is a technical and a both editorial thing. But mostly knowledge management deals in this kind of a job. So, and knowledge management is, in my opinion, since I've been in this industry or role for about 12, 13 years now, and I've worked for two very major consulting firms. Knowledge management is process driven. That's true that there is a process that you need to follow, but it is also a little bit more academic. It's not one of those jobs where you get a message in the morning and say, do this, and you just do that. But you'll have to read through what you have to do. And every time the solution could be different. So in knowledge management, at most times, I have dealt with possibilities and probabilities rather than certainty. So I might have three, four solutions for the same problem, but I end up choosing the one which is most acceptable across the board rather than the best one.
Okay.
So it's a very academic thing. I'm saying because of two reasons. First is you have to read a lot. If something comes to your desk, if you don't read it, then you can't do anything else. I can't give specific examples there because it will be very specific. But I try to generalize something. So for example, if I get something in a form where whole strategic transformation was done for over say 3 to 4 years. If it comes to us, we'll have to generalize it to a point, not only that we protect the client's identity, but also curate that knowledge in a way that it is understandable by people who were not even part of that project. And they can use those learnings somewhere else, either for business development or for, solving a problem. So that's what it generally is just simplifying and curating knowledge in a way that it is usable across and understandable across the board.
Okay. So, Deepankar, the kind of input you get, do you get it in a structured or unorganized manner?
It can happen both ways. And that's why I said we deal in possibilities and probabilities and not certainties. Sometimes we go for a solution thinking that it will work in the way we expected it to go, but then it is not acceptable across the board. So we have to go back and say, okay, let's try something else. There are certain black and white things which are done, and then there are some gray areas. And again, it is depending upon who owns that piece of knowledge and all of that. And it's at the end of the day their prerogative to decide how much they want to share and what they want to share. But it's like, say for example, a writer writes a book which is 5,000 pages, right? But it's totally very complicated. So the editor decides, okay, fine, let's trim it down to 200 pages. It could be a solution like that. And then there is purpose. Sometimes purpose is to develop business. So you generate products like that. Sometimes they are to explain people what that concept is. So you produce a content which is more learning based rather than solution based. Then sometimes they could be mechanisms or processes to solve a certain kind of a problem. So you design something like that. So it depends what the need is. It depends like how we want to curate that content, what is the purpose of that content. Sometimes we also develop products which are, say, knowledge libraries or things which are accumulation of knowledge from multiple things, and they are published for use within the firm, or they would be consumed in a way whenever necessity arises. So the usage of a product is only defined over a period of time. So that's what it generally is. And when we build products, they are for multiple years. So efficiency and the productivity is only analyzed after it has lived a certain life. Otherwise, these are not like consumable products that you just tear off the packet and eat them or do whatever with them. But over a period of time, they would be able to generate some value across the firm or the business that it's supposed to serve. So yeah, that's generally what we do. But then there are other things also, depending upon what does the firm do, what is their necessity. Sometimes they have experts within the firm, so they have to manage that expert database. Sometimes, other repositories are there, so people have to manage business development driven databases and all of that. Sometimes it's just pure data, Excel sheets, and you kind of have models that are preserved for multiple usage. One team uses it today, the other team will use it tomorrow. So there are multiple things that happen. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting industry or a job for people who one have, say, interest in a particular industry and they want to learn more about it. And people who think they would like to read and develop knowledge over a period of time, because it's a process, it's execution right. But then as the industry moves, you have to kind of also develop your knowledge over a period of time. So that's what it is. It's unfortunate that I cannot give very specific examples of certain things, but if you read about knowledge management on Wikipedia or other resources, they are quite accurate. They are not different from what I'm saying right now. But obviously, my view is more practical, experience driven, and that is more, academic and, coming from theory. But this is what I'm trying to explain is that it's a role where you have to kind of keep reading all the time and, kind of go with the technology. So, like every other industry or role, artificial intelligence, whether it's conversational AI or whether it's generative AI, is going to have a huge effect on our roles as well. Like I'm pretty close to some projects which use generative AI for many purposes, but it is surely going to have an effect on this role and also on the industry. And we have to move with that. We have to develop products which are, you know, can use generative AI and be beneficial for people, make things faster, make things more efficient, higher productivity, and let human beings take more decision-based roles rather than just execution-based roles. So that's what it is right now.
So Deepankar, a couple of questions based on what you explained about knowledge management. One, what I'm understanding is from organization to organization, the kind of work that you do will differ. Purely, it will be driven by what is their purpose of having a knowledge management team in place, right? If I go back to the example that we discussed, the purpose of preserving that knowledge base about how the client transformation happened is not only to explain to other teams in the organization who were not part of the execution that how to do it in case similar thing comes in future, but it is also kind of a case study for business development, right? Mm-hmm. So the kind of writing you will do for informing your team versus writing a case study for business development purposes will be different, right? So you have to know how to present the same information for different purposes.
That's right.
Right. So is it an individual contributor role or do you work as a team on a particular project?
I started as a individual contributor when I was an analyst, but now I am a team manager, so I manage a topic team and another team which is more execution driven. When you start, obviously it's an individual contributor role, and you have to do certain things which are used as a process to preserve the intellectual property and the knowledge that a certain company has. And during the first 3-4 years, even 5 years, the learning curve of this role is very steep. Mm-hmm. And it happens because of two reasons. First reason is that if you choose an industry, like for me, I have been associated mostly with finance industry for most part of my career. Obviously, I don't know everything about finance. So I don't think anybody could be a financial services expert, but people could be retail banking experts or insurance experts or asset management experts. So even if you choose a single industry to get to know at least to an advanced level, it will take about 3 to 4 years of your time. So one is the topic. And secondly, in knowledge management, things move pretty quickly. So you are doing things in a certain way, then you start doing things in a more efficient way, then you do more advanced things. Say, for example, you were just creating business development material for first 2 years of your job. And suddenly then you're asked to create like how-to guide, right? So obviously you won't do it like in the first month properly. So it takes a while for you to kind of get to know those things and how to do it, and you learn over a period of time. Then there are trainings that you have to do. So the learning curve is pretty steep. So first 4 to 5 years, it's mostly individual contributor role, and slowly and steadily as you grow in the role, you go up in the organization. You might end up getting people management responsibilities, which is a common theme across industries. But what generally happened with me was that first I was an individual contributor, then I was given a role of like a trainer or a guide or a mentor for colleagues who have just joined the organization. And then slowly and steadily, I moved on to become a team manager. So it's the entire thing. But like most industries or most roles, you start as an individual contributor. Since it's not always just an execution role, it might take some time for people to understand like what's going on and everything. So I can share my own personal experience. I think I took about a year and a half to completely understand what I'm supposed to do and do it in a way where my work doesn't require every step of review.
Mhm.
But then it took me at least 3 to 4 years more to understand what does this mean in a bigger context. How is this getting used? How can I make it better? It only happens when you start interacting with more senior people and you get to know their point of view that we are making this because of this. But when you start, and in like most roles, you are just doing one part of it, not the entire thing. So you get to know that part very well. You're very good at it. But to get to know the entire picture, it takes a really long time for kind of get to that level of expertise. And it happens with time. You can't force push it because it doesn't happen like that. And if you force push it, in my opinion, it will be a recipe for disaster because the skill will not be there and the expectation will be much higher. If you go into any knowledge management organization structure, you will not find very fancy designations. They'll be very close to what you're doing, right? So my current designation is senior content manager, and this is exactly what I do. I manage content for a certain practice area of a certain consulting firm, and senior because the level of experience I have. Simple as that. So that's what it is. Sometimes it could seem a little slower, but that's not because the career option is slower, but the level of understanding you need and the level of learning you need to do this role demands a bit of time for you to learn. And sometimes your growth doesn't happen vertically. Like most of my personal professional growth has happened horizontally. Like my designation was the same, but I was doing much more this year, then the next year much more, then the next year much more. And then the vertical growth happens. And then you are at that level, then you start doing more and more and more, and then growth happens. So it's always like that, at least in knowledge management. If somebody makes this career choice, then it should be basically for two reasons. First is, as I said, your interest in a certain topic. And the second thing is then if you want to create new things, write a little bit or curate things or, make products which are useful. So those kind of things. And it moves with technology. So if you have interest in technology, it's even better. So that's the role it is.
So you mentioned write a little bit. I believe
Yeah.
writing is not just a little bit. This will involve good amount of writing.
Yeah. Sometimes it could involve a lot of writing, and sometimes it could mean summarizing things. For example, somebody could send me a 400-page report. I have to read it, and somehow I have to create like a one-page description of the case, which is more marketing oriented rather than explanation oriented. Obviously, you can't explain everything in such a big report in one page, but you could create a marketing material which could help sell more of those kinds of products in the market, right? So it depends. So how much you're going to write, how are you going to curate? So I can give you one example, which is similar and also a little different in many ways. So we have so many online platforms, right? It could be Amazon, it could be Mintra, it could be many more, right? Flipkart and everything. So what are they doing? They are getting all the products on their platform, which they haven't manufactured, by the way. And then they are selling it to people based on their interest, right? What kind of messages you get from these notifications that you get from these apps is we have a curated offering for you or something that you might be interested in, right? So they're pushing products based on your history of usage. Right? So if I'm ordering more books, then they are sending me more book kind of things. If I'm ordering more shoes, then they are sending me more shoes kind of thing. So in all of this, what these platforms are doing is basically trying to help sell the product. There is no real value addition to the product. The product is what the product is, and it's been sold and dispatched and delivered. But knowledge management isn't like that. We get something, then we have to make sure that we add value to it, basically curate it in a way which is consumable across the board. And then you have to also market it on whatever platform you have and make sure that it is getting consumed. Sometimes there might be a piece of information available, but for some reason, technical or otherwise, people are not able to find it. So that's also our problem. And we try to solve it. by multiple ways. So that's the difference. The value addition that knowledge management teams would do, that's the real value addition. And that's why it's a little different.
So, Deepankar, I understand that everybody kind of starts as an individual contributor. They are given certain assignments and you're focused on completing that on your own. But what I wanted to understand by that question is basically, is it a team activity, or is it like, let's say if a document is to be created and you are the sole person responsible for that document, maybe a reviewer after you, but that's about it? Or do you need to work with teams to create the documents that you create?
So in knowledge management, there are many times you're not creating anything. You have created things already, but you have to curate them in a way, redesign them in a way which is more suitable for common purposes. So obviously, you have multiple parties involved here. First is that the writer of the document, whoever owns that document, and you get that document. You then try to redesign it. Obviously, then that person is also in the loop with what you're doing. Then there are other people, as you said, reviewers who will review that. And then this document is developed, right? So it's obviously communicating with multiple people to get this thing done. It cannot be a unilateral decision that we are going to do this. So that's why, I mean, at least not in a very big firm, it cannot be a unilateral decision, because what we end up working on is a lot of confidential information. And sometimes a person who has not worked on that project himself or herself might not be able to figure out what is confidential and what is not. So we have to take guidance from people who are more close to that part of knowledge, and also with people who make sure that the process that it went through was as per the standard operating procedure. So it's never just one person. Everybody has their own defined role and they would do it.
And is the content mostly text oriented, or do you have to use visual media also for this?
It's mostly text oriented. It's mostly text or numbers, models, those kind of things. Because, as I said, if it was a very marketing driven company, then I think they will have a lot of visual media.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's some kind of other industry, they will have some visual media, but most of it will end up being a lot of text. At least I've worked with text a lot in most firms that I've worked with. And I've not worked for any marketing firm so far. So I wouldn't know a lot of information about them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's mostly text, numbers, Excel models, stuff like that.
And so if I'm looking at the scope of navigation, so to say, so there are definitely this role or knowledge management as a career path is available in many industries, many organizations, I would say, right?
Yeah,
this is not like a very small niche kind of a job, a career path.
When I started, it was.
Okay.
But I think the industry has developed over a period of time, and a lot of companies have designed their own knowledge management teams. They might name it differently. Somebody can call it content, somebody can call it knowledge. But I think every industry at the end of the day now have this kind of a role. And at least I've seen a lot of those roles on LinkedIn, which I thought in that industry maybe it will not be there. But I've seen certain roles there, like knowledge manager roles, knowledge analyst roles in industries where I never thought they have it. But because this is the day and age of data, I think everybody has realized the value of preserving and reusing data over and over again in the most appropriate way. And there are so many legalities that are ingrained in such a process that it requires a separate kind of a team that can help you do that. And I'm very sure if there was a knowledge management team in a legal firm, they will totally operate differently. If it was in a consumer firm, they will operate completely differently. In a consulting firm or a financial driven firm, they will operate very differently. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're trying to use whatever knowledge you have in the most appropriate way that gives you an edge over the other competitors. So that's what it is. But it's still niche, but it's more common now than it was earlier.
At least people are aware of it. I
Yeah,
also see a lot of knowledge
yeah,
management job
yeah,
roles or
yeah,
profiles on LinkedIn.
yeah. And to be honest, I interview quite a few people for these roles. And sometimes I'm surprised to hear that people actually know what it is.
Mhm.
To be honest, when I started, I didn't know what it is. And there was not a lot of literature available on it. But I think now there is a lot of literature available on it. There are many groups on LinkedIn also, which are knowledge management based. So obviously, people are more aware about it. It's a viable career option. I've made a career out of it, so I can say it very safely that it is a viable career option. And if you want to do such a role, then yeah, there are certain prerequisites of what you want your career to be, right? So that I think is in the picture. Like everybody has an idea of like everybody has a preference how their career should be. And if your career aspirations ends up meeting, the role requirements that it has, this knowledge management thing has, then obviously it's a viable career option for anybody.
So now, Dipankar, will move into your career journey. How
Okay.
did you come into the field of knowledge management?
I'll say it's an happy accident. I started as an entrepreneur. I had some ventures that I did. And then after I did my postgrad, I started I started to look for jobs. Unfortunately, it was 2008 and it was a recession year. It was recession such a long time. So it was very difficult to find a good enough job which was paying well. I did internships in a couple of places. One was a bank, the other was a HR firm. And I was able to do the job, but I thought that it's not something that I would like to do in the long term. So I ended up getting a role at an expert network, which is a very famous expert network. And there I was managing some of their expert knowledge, and I was part of the knowledge management team. Then I moved to the analytics team before I left the organization. Then I went to work for another big consulting firm. There I was part of the financial institutions practice for about 5 years, and it was an individual contributor role. I when I left, I was a senior analyst, and I mostly worked on a lot of content which was financial industry based, retail banking, insurance, asset management, all those kind of things. And I also did a lot of operations kind of things, which were like pipeline management and revenue reporting and all of that stuff. So until that point of time, I think most of my expertise lied in how to make presentations on PowerPoint and how to crunch numbers on Excel. So that was my basic kind of experience at that point of time. Then I moved to a finance asset management firm, and I was there for about 3.5 years. I was part of a consulting team there, which mostly did consulting on regulation driven projects. And after that, I came to the current role that I'm doing of a content manager. And during this process, I did multiple topics, and I also have like content related projects with me. Then I also have a team to manage, so I do that as well. But how did I come to knowledge management? Was just I interviewed for the role which was available, and whatever I heard from the interviewer, I liked the role, I liked the company, and I started it thinking that I'm going to give it a shot. If I like it, I will continue. Otherwise, I'll look for something else. But I ended up liking it, and I continued for a very long time in that role. And then I took similar roles in other organizations as well. So it was mostly so I didn't think that I'm going to do knowledge management, but when I did it, I liked it, and I kept doing it. That's about it really.
You said you started as an entrepreneur and
Yeah.
then you moved into looking for a
Yeah.
job. Is there a
Yeah.
reason you switched from being an
Uh,
entrepreneur to a job?
I think it was mostly to gain more knowledge about the industry. That was like my main reason for getting into the industry, because once you work for some good firms, you become a better professional. I won't mind going back to entrepreneurship again at some point of time in my life. I wouldn't mind that at all. But I think I have a lot to learn, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I have this personal principle that I stop doing things when I stop enjoying them, because I think then I'm not able to give my 100% to whatever I'm doing. So I've learned a lot, and thanks to a lot of very, very capable managers that I ended up in their teams, and very, very good firms that I ended up working for. And I think I mostly dedicate whatever I've been able to do so far to these organizations and these people. And the colleagues that I've had have been mostly responsible for what I know today and what I'm doing today. So I think working for many organizations which are leading in their field, it has helped me with becoming a better professional, understanding what professionalism really means. I got exposure to team management, which is, in my opinion, is one of the difficult things on earth to do. And the third thing is that I've learned many topics which I otherwise wouldn't have any knowledge about. And the fourth thing I think I've learned is how to communicate with people. I think I find it easier now than I found it easier like 10 years ago. So I guess that has helped me grow as an individual, as a professional. And most of it, I like what I do, which gives me inspiration every day to kind of keep doing it and keep doing it better. So yeah, I mean, that's the reason why I switched. But to be honest, if after a few years I become an entrepreneur or not become an entrepreneur, both are not shocking. So it can go both ways depending upon what the situation is.
Yeah, again, depending on what you want to do at that point in time.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like I'm asking this question more from the perspective of students who are probably looking for getting into knowledge management after hearing you. So if they have to approach somebody that, okay, this is a field of work, would like to explore. So anything that you would like to tell them?
Yeah, it's easier now. It's way easier now. At that time, LinkedIn existed, but it was, I think, very basic, and a lot of people even didn't, use those kind of platforms. I got into that role via a reference. So the surprising thing about my career, and sometimes I think about it, and I have actually got all my roles via referencing. So I work somewhere, then I get reference somewhere, then I go there. So that chain continues. But now it's very easy. If you see a role, it's available on LinkedIn. Try to get to the human resource manager or the recruiting manager. I get many messages through LinkedIn and other platforms. If you have a list of companies, so if I had to do it today, this is how I will do it. I will list down the name of the companies that I want to work for, and then I will keep an eye on their career section and also their LinkedIn feed, and then I can apply through them. It's a much easier and better option to take rather than finding another way. In some cases, you might know somebody who works at that firm. So then it's even more easier. You can ask for a reference, right? So it's way easier now. Even the job descriptions that I read these days are much clearer, and they are much more close to the job, and they're not very random, right? So everybody is writing exactly what you're doing, which was maybe not the case like 13, 14 years ago, because the industry was still kind of understanding what the role is going to be after like a year or so. But yeah, it's easy. It's easy to apply, but again, that makes it even more competitive, because what is the edge you have over other candidates who are going to apply, right? So the edge you can have is, one, understanding of the company where you're applying for. Secondly, understanding of the job description. And it can happen in many ways. You can connect with people on LinkedIn and ask them, okay, I saw this role and you're doing this role. Can you please explain me what this is about? Right? There's so many social networks these days where people can, go and find out more about that company, about the role. So many things are already available. So I think knowing what the company does and what kind of work they do and what the role is a bare minimum one person should know. And then it should be, if not 100% clear, some directional view of what is the kind of career you're trying to build, right? In what kind of topic you want to go. So do you want to go to sales or marketing or knowledge management or asset management, portfolio management? What do you want to do? There has to be some understanding of what you want to do. Because, and I don't want to be cynical here, but sometimes I read a lot of resumes and a lot of information is given in those resumes. But when I dig through it a little bit during the interview, I don't get the answers that one should be able to give if they have written something on their resume. So I would say just be very
authentic.
clean, be authentic at all times. Authenticity is a very big edge actually.
Yeah.
Because it points towards integrity, honesty, and many other values that are required to be a good professional. So be authentic and network with people, with good people, and people who you think are doing professionally well. And then obviously it will help grow your network. And I'm sure many people will be happy to provide you more guidance on career. So yeah, I mean, there is multiple ways of applying for such roles or any role for that matter.
This is true for most of the roles that you want to go for. Yeah. This was a happy accident. Okay. Yeah. And as you were growing up, and this was not in your aspiration list, that this is what I want to be, but what was in your aspiration list? That this is the kind of career path I want to go for.
I was not very sure, but I wanted to explore a little bit about how the financial market, the financial structures work. And that's why I took up a role in a bank initially. But that ended up being more sales driven, which was not what I was trying to do. So when I got into knowledge management, I realized that this is not about sales or anything like that, but it is more about understanding of concepts, understanding of the industry, understanding of the evolving market situation. And that made me stay in knowledge management. But when I started, I had this sense in my mind, which proved to be very wrong, that I would not like a sitting job. I would like to travel a lot and all of that. I ended up traveling for work. That's a separate story. But when I actually did this role, I realized that learning about new things, researching more things is where my real interest lies. And I love reading books, so I read quite a bit. So I think it's a good career option for me because it helps me do the same thing there also. But generally, at least when you start, you try to get a role which is paying you very well. But that is not the career option. What I suggest is look at how much remuneration you're getting, but also look at the role and its future avenues. What can you do after 5 years, 10 years? Personally, I have a short-term plan, like what am I going to do in this year? Then I have a medium-term plan, what should I achieve in 2-3 years? Then I have a longer goal, 5+ years. And if those goals are not matching your profession, it will be very difficult to be satisfied with your job. It doesn't matter how much money you're making. So with remuneration, it always sounds a little less. You always feel like you should be earning 25% more or 30% more, right? But it should not be the only consideration. It's a very important consideration that you should know very clearly how much you're getting remunerated. And just not the remuneration, what benefits you're getting from this role. Like, there are companies who are giving so many benefits that were not available earlier. So there are so many other benefits that companies give. Remuneration plus benefit plus your professional growth in the next, 5, 6, 7 years. Very few people in an interview ask me a very simple question like, if I do this role for 3 years, where will I be? And I end up asking them to ask me this question. That why don't you ask me this question, right? So this is something that I suggest that everybody should do. But yeah, generally remuneration is the only thing people have in mind, especially when they are getting placed through a college, because that's something sold as a badge, that
so much.
Nobody actually shows the JD what they are going to do, but
getting paid so much. Yeah,
getting paid so much. It should be. As I said, it's a very important thing, the economic side of things, but should not be the only consideration. Is what I suggest.
Very good advice. Here's how much money I'm going to get paid. which
Yeah.
even before they understand what's the job role, right? Okay. So now moving on, in terms of challenges, you must have faced certain challenges when you got into the role and you were growing, right?
Yeah.
Could you
Yeah.
share some of those challenges?
Yeah, sure. The first challenge was skill. I think it's very important to build skill in terms of practical knowledge, right? For example, some basic skills are, do you know how to use the Microsoft Office suite, right? Which includes your PowerPoints, your Words, your Excels, and all of those things. And then how to do some basic research. I appeared in an interview for a firm. My interview went very well. And then they gave me a task where I had to do some basic research. And I literally struggled because I hadn't done it so much in that from that point of view. So some basic research capabilities, even if it's on the internet. The third thing is capability to kind of communicate with different kinds of an audience. When I started, I didn't have any juniors to communicate with. It was only my peers or seniors. And sometimes I found it difficult to communicate with my seniors or people who are very, very senior. So I think these are the challenges mostly that I've had. But over a period of time, you kind of start learning, these things, how to write an email. Sometimes you write a really long email and the other person doesn't know what to respond. So having that solution driven communication doesn't matter whether it's written communication or verbal communication in both senses. And then it's actually easier now because there are so many learning platforms. So you can learn Tableau, Alteryx, so many other things, which were not commonly available at that point of time. But yeah, I mean, these are some challenges that I faced and they came up. I tried to learn them over a period of time. And because the job was such, I had to learn and had to go through the rigor of training and everything. The good thing was that whichever firm I ended up working with had a very good training program when you join, when usual normal training program, so many training resources. So even if I was not looking outside, the system was training me. So that was, I think, I consider that to be the real turning point in my career. The trainings that I got, you know, I did a lot of while I was trying to learn Excel, I paid for a lot of trainings which were happening outside the company. But I realized they were not very efficient for me because I was learning about Excel, but not how to implement them. Mm-hmm. But when I had a training within the firm, I not only learned Excel, but also how I'm going to implement those things in day-to-day, work as well. So these were challenges mostly, but there is the other challenge was that I was in the first 2-3 years, I don't think I was clear what I was going to do in the future. What kind of a career path I will have, what kind of roles I would want to do. Later, I realized that I would want to be a people manager at some level. And then I read a lot about it, like how to do it. Then some practical experience also helped. But yeah, I think when you grow from one level to the other, there is always some challenges and challenges will exist. It's just that you have to clearly know your developmental areas because if you are not clear what your development areas are, then it becomes a challenge. Giving feedback is a very difficult thing sometimes when it's more developmental, but even taking that is very difficult. So you need to develop some good listening skills and acceptance skills that, yes, these are my developmental areas and I need to work on them. And the thing is, everybody has them. Is not that only a set of people have them. Even the best of performers will have some developmental areas. The only difference is somebody has something basic, somebody have like very advanced ones as well. But mostly it is common for everybody. Everybody has some developmental areas and challenges. And it could differ from industry to industry, from person to person, what kind of challenges they face. But my initial challenges were more skill driven rather than anything else.
Okay. So, having been a team manager for a good number of years now, what are the kind of challenges you have seen in others? Yours were mostly skill driven, but what do you think that you see in others?
They are common. They are common. I mean, skill is always when people join an industry. Obviously, there is a skill gap. You know, you need to learn few things from the start and all of that. So, skill is always an issue. Not an issue, but a developmental area. The second, in some cases, when you are coming out of a college, you still have certain habits which have developed in your educational life. So your educational life is your preschool, school, college, university, and it's a really long time in your life, right? So you have developed certain habits during that period. Then you have to reform certain habits depending upon where you are going to work, right? Is it a flexible job? Is it not a flexible job? You know, and it depends from person to person. Some people make that switch very quickly, and for some people it takes a while to reform those habits. You know, I'm not saying that you develop bad habits in an educational life. No, but they are more suitable for your educational life. But there are certain habits that you have to develop in your professional life as well, right? Like how you communicate within a professional setup. In an educational life, you have mostly your fellow students and then your, educational teachers and
Teachers,
professors
yeah.
and everybody else, right? In a professional setup, you have your peers, your juniors, your seniors, so many other teams that you interact with. So you have to develop certain habits that will help you communicate with those people. Then you have more discipline. In a lot of organizations, you have to be in office at a certain time or log in at a certain time, which is not very flexible sometimes. So you have to develop certain discipline, right? And in many cases, at least in our country, and I think in most countries, you might have to leave your native town and travel to a bigger town and get a job. So not only are you adjusting with your job, but you're adjusting with your residence, where you live, how you live, the language that you speak, etc., 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 the food that you eat. So initially, it's a very challenging thing to do. But I mean, there could be many challenges. What I have faced, the most difficult challenge is a behavioral challenge. Skill is not a challenge. If it's a skill issue, it's not a problem at all. With time and training, we will solve that issue. But if it's a will issue, and it could be for multiple reasons, that is a more difficult problem to solve, right? So my advice is that whichever company you join, the first is to become a part of that culture and make sure that you become a part of that company and adopt those values first. Because without adopting those values, it will be very difficult to feel as part of that organization. A lot of people that I know who are acquaintances or friends, they have changed their jobs because they were doing well, but somehow they were not feeling culturally aligned with the organization they worked. Right? So it's that important. So you need to get aligned with that culture also. There are a lot of jobs these days which are very flexible, like you are working from a distance, you're working from home or some remote location. When you're starting your career in the first few years, what at least my suggestion is or my recommendation is try to be in the office and absorb that atmosphere, and also build relationships with your colleagues, your, people you're going to work with and all of that. So if you're a people manager, one value that you need to imbibe fully is empathy. And without meeting people and having a relationship with people, it's going to be very difficult to develop that value properly in a professional setup. Showing empathy in personal life could be a little different than showing empathy in professional life. So I'd say to build good interpersonal relationships within the firm that you work, and also to build good knowledge about where you work, what the firm does, what are the rules and regulations of a firm, etc., etc. It's good to be in that value driven culture where you go to the office and you imbibe those values. So yeah, I mean, these are certain things that I see, but none of these are unsolvable problems or issues. They're all solvable. It's just that it takes time.
So, Deepankar, you mentioned empathy in professional setup is different from empathy in personal life. So, could you share an example here?
Empathy in personal life is you understand that somebody is having an issue and you hear them out. And in most cases, you can help that person out without any structural boundary. I could help somebody out in many ways in my personal life, and nobody is there to tell me this is the way you're going to help this person. But in a professional setup, sometimes when you have to show empathy, you have to do it in a setup. Right? There are
Organizational boundaries.
organizational boundaries. You have to help that person.
Mhm.
And in that situation, you are not free to do everything you want to do. You're not free to say what you want to say, right? You have to stay within certain organizational prescribed form or limit to show empathy, right? Say, for example, if there is a person who I feel should improve their performance on certain metrics, what would the empathy be? Would empathy be that I don't say anything to that person and hope that person will improve over a period of time? Or would empathy be that we get into like a one-on-one conversation and discuss about it openly, right? Sometimes even a discussion which nobody wants to do is actually empathy because you're trying to help that person and making sure that that person is able to grow in their career, right? And also solve their own problems, by the way, because if
Very good
somebody is not,
example.
you know, so empathy could be very difficult to display in a professional setup, right? And empathy could mean differently for different people, right? Sometimes if I end up showing a lot of empathy, that person might not like it, even not like it at all, right? And sometimes I might be a little more disciplinarian with that person, but it's not for my own personal purpose. Is to make sure that that person is not falling behind on their career. So empathy could be so unless and until you have this habit of communicating with people. So another example is if you and me are having this discussion on Zoom, but if we had this discussion face to face, I think a lot of questions could be different. A lot of my responses could be different.
Mhm.
Right? Then why meeting people is important? I can share one instance, although in a very sanitized way. There was one of my managers. That person was not here. That person was from a different country and have never met me. I have never met that person. And we had a very strictly professional relationship, which I don't think both of us liked in a way that we disagreed quite a bit on many things. But when that person met me and I met that person, we still had those disagreements, but we also became friends. We became better colleagues. And even when we have disagreements, we reached a conclusion and we are more open to each other's ideas. So sometimes it's a little different.
The personal
The
connect
connect
makes a lot of
is
difference.
always different. So I don't know if people will be interested in it, but sometimes if you read books on psychology, especially Adlerian psychology, then they will say that most problems are interpersonal problems, right?
Yes.
And in a professional setup, it's easier to operate. For me personally, I I'm able to operate more easily in my professional life because I have an objective in mind that this is what I'm going to achieve. And after that, nothing else matters for me. Doesn't matter if I personally agree with the other person that I'm working with, or is that person also agreeing with me? As long as we are going towards a common objective, a common goal in a civilized way, in a professional way, I'm completely okay with that. But in a personal life situation, if I don't like somebody, then I might not just work with that person,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I meant when I said empathy could be very different in personal life and professional life.
Mhm.
Right? So these are things which are important to learn because Sometimes we end up doing a lot of bias in professional life, especially affinity bias. People who agree with our way of thinking and our solution, we tend to gravitate towards them, right? Instead, I think sometimes it's better to go the other way and pressure test and peer review your thoughts. Even if they are in complete opposite direction of what you were thinking, it's better to be proven wrong now than at a later time, right? So I think it's important to be professional, have empathy, but it's a little different in a personal life and in professional life. It's not the same.
With this, we conclude part 1 of episode 8. I sincerely hope you found today's conversation both interesting and informative. Your thoughts and comments are invaluable to us. If you have any questions or seek further insights, please don't hesitate to drop us a message. Your engagement fuels our growth and guides our content direction. Thank you for being an essential part of our community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and share it with friends, colleagues, or anyone who might benefit from our discussions. Also, consider subscribing to our channel to receive notifications of upcoming episodes as soon as they are released. Stay tuned for the remaining parts of this episode on knowledge management. Thank you once again for tuning in. Have a wonderful day ahead.